Hare Krishna. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any updates.
For a liberated person, all the enjoyments listed above are considered to be absolutely useless. Only those who are conditioned by the material modes of external energy are captivated by different types of material enjoyment. In other words, the transcendentalists have no material desires to be fulfilled, whereas the materialist has all types of desires to be fulfilled. The Lord has proclaimed that the materialists who desire material enjoyment and thus seek the favor of different demigods, as above mentioned, are not in control of their senses and so give themselves to nonsense. One should therefore not desire any sort of material enjoyment, being sensible enough to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The leaders of nonsensical persons are still more nonsensical because they preach openly and foolishly that one can worship any form of the demigods and get the same result. This sort of preaching is not against the teaching. This sort of preaching is not against the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita or those of the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Not only
What did I read?
not only
This sort of preaching is not only against. This sort of preaching is not only against the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and those of the Srimad Bhagavatam, but it is also foolish, just as it is foolish to claim that with the purchase of any travel ticket, one may reach the same destination. No one can reach Bombay from Delhi by purchasing a ticket for Baroda. It is clearly defined here that persons impregnated with different desires have different modes of worship. But one who has no desire for material enjoyment should worship the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, the Personality of Godhead. And this worshipping process is called devotional service. Pure devotional service means service of the Lord without any tinge of material desires, including desire for fruitive activity and empiric speculation. For fulfillment of material desires, one may worship the Supreme Lord, but the result of such worship is different, as it will be explained in the next verse. Generally, the Lord does not fulfill anyone's material desires for sense enjoyment, but He awards such benedictions to worshippers of the Lord, for they ultimately come to the point of not desiring material enjoyment. The conclusion is that one must minimize the desires of material enjoyment, and for this one should worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is described here as Param, or beyond anything material. Sripad Shankaracharya has also stated, Narayana Paro Vyakta, the Supreme Lord is beyond the material encirclement. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena
Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah.
Namo Vishwapadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nidhi Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधरा श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. Here in this chapter we are seeing a long list of material desires and whom one should worship as described by Shukadeva Goswami. Shukadeva Goswami said, Maharaj Parikshit, as you have inquired from me as to the duty of the intelligent man who is on the threshold of death, so I have answered you. One who desires to be absorbed, and then the list begins. Brahma varchasa kamastu yajet brahmana patim indram indriya kamastu praja kama prajapatim devin mayam tu shri kamas tejas kamo vibhavasu vasukamo vasurudran वीर्यकामो अथ वीर्यवान अन्नाद्यकामस्त्व अदितिं स्वर्गकामो अदिते सुधान विश्वान देवान राज्यकामः साध्यान संसाधको विशाम आयुष्कामो अश्विनौ देवो पुष्टिकामा इनाम यजे प्रतिष्ठकाम पुरुषो रोदसी Lokamatrat Mataro. Rodasi means what? Horizon. Lokamatro. Under earth. Then. Stri Kamo Apsara Urvashi. रूपाभिकामो गंधर्वान स्त्री कामो अप्सर उर्वशी आधिपत्य कामः सर्वेषां यजेता परमेष्ठिनम् यज्ञं यजे यशस्कामः कोशकामः प्रचेतसां विद्याकामस्तु गिरिशं दाम्पत्यार्थ उमां सते. धर्मार्थ उत्तम श्लोकम तंतुम तन्मन पितृन्यजे रक्षाकामः पुण्यजनान ओजस्कामः मरुद्गणान राज्यकामो मनुन्देवान निवृत्तिं त्वभिधरण्यजे कामकामो यजेत् सोमम् अकामः पुरुषं परम्. So big list is there. यशोकामा, राज्यकामा, पुष्टिकामा, अन्नाद्यकामा. And this is what the Vedic literatures describe. And in this long list, today's verse, Shukadeva Goswami is ending by saying, Akamaha Purusham Param. There is one more desire, the desire to be desireless. Akamaha Purusham Param. One who wishes to become free from all material desires, he must worship the Lord. The first sentence of the purport is very interesting. For a liberated person, all the enjoyments listed above are considered to be absolutely useless. This is the position of a liberated person. It is not that in Krishna consciousness we have all kinds of material desires and we are somehow struggling because philosophically we have understood or something that this is not good. But we'll come to a state of consciousness where all these things we consider to be absolutely useless. Prabhupada gave the example, just like when we were small children, we were attached to so many toys. Now as we grow up, we understand those toys are all useless. We don't have to struggle to give up our attraction to the toys. Hardly it bothers us, isn't it? So naturally, so spontaneously, we have no attraction for the toys. In the same way, for a liberated person, all these attractions on the material world, boundless that conditions runs after, they are just useless. It's a very desirable state. Most naturally, most spontaneously be unattracted. Param drishtva nivartante. When we develop a higher taste, param drishtva. Now we are seeing something higher, experiencing something higher. Then we give up the taste. This is the plan, this is the program of Krishna consciousness. And in the next sentence, Prabhupada says something even more important. Only those who are conditioned by the material modes of external energy are captivated by different types of material enjoyment. So the very presence of different kinds of material desires for enjoyment in our heart is an indication that we are under the control of the modes of material nature. It is under the modes of material nature that we desire different kinds of material things in this world attract us. And Srila Prabhupada makes one very important statement in the Bhagavad Gita. 14th chapter. When one is free from the influence of modes of material nature, he enters into devotional service. So if we are under the influence of the modes of material nature, if we are still tainted by various material desires, we have not yet entered devotional service. Because devotional service is that which pleases Krishna. Devotional service is what we are aiming for. And hence, in order to perform devotional service, we have to become free from the modes of material nature. And becoming free from the modes of material nature is liberation. And that is why the first sentence of Prabhupada's purport today, for those who are liberated, all the enjoyments listed above are considered to be absolutely useless. Only those who are conditioned by the material modes of external energy are captivated by different types of material enjoyment. In other words, the transcendentalists have no material desires to be fulfilled, whereas the materialist has all types of desires to be fulfilled. So this should be a great motivation for us, that if I have to enter devotional service, I have to become free from the influence of the modes of material nature. To become free from the influence of modes of material nature means to become. In other places, Prabhupada also mentions that there are 3 stages of chanting Hare Krishna: offensive, clearing, and offenseless. And to come to the platform of offenseless chanting, one has to become liberated from the influence of the modes of nature. So, in the beginning, one may be committing offenses and chanting, and then there is a phase of struggle to become free from the offenseless, to become free from the offenses. And that stage is the stage of anartha nivritti. That is the stage where we want to become free from the influence of the modes of nature. And then we come to the stage when we become free from the influence of the modes, then we can chant offenses. So, this is the position of the conditioned souls. They have varieties of desires, and according to the association they come in touch with, different kinds of desires grow. Sometimes we come in touch with, just like newspapers, magazines, cinemas, and all those different stories. All of them have an intent to create some material desires. And that's why, as devotees trying to become free from material desires, we like to avoid such mundane literature. The mundane literature are all actually meant to create different kinds of it. When we associate with such literature or have such association, that association leaves a seed of material desire. And that material desire, that seed can grow. Hence, we are expected to be very careful about these different kinds of association. On the other hand, if we read transcendental literature, like the Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, they sow the seeds of increasing our spiritual desires and understand the futility of the material desires. Then Prabhupada is saying, the Lord has proclaimed that the materialists who desire material enjoyment and thus seek the favor of different demigods, as above mentioned, are not in control of their senses and so give themselves to nonsense. Kamaistai jnana prapadyante anyadevataha. So very strongly, Krishna is very clearly making the statement. There is him and there are Anya Devatas. And who worships him and who worships the Anya Devatas? Kamaistai jnana. They have lost their intelligence, they have lost their sense, jnana. And hence they kamaistai jnana prapadyante Anya Devataha. And after another verse, Krishna concludes by again describing Antavattu phalam tesham tat bhavati alpamedasam. Why they are considered to be alpamedasa? Why they are considered to be hutagyana? Because that phala they get by worshipping these different devatas, as enlisted here. All the phala is antavat phalam tesha. It has an end. This ability to sense that this desire, these pursuits have an end. These material pursuits, the results of that, the phala of that one has an end. Hence I should abstain from that. That requires spiritual intelligence and spiritual awakening. It is not simply some kind of an intellectual thing. We might have intellectually understood these things, but unless we come to that platform of purification, we will not be free. We will be still running afterwards. So, as devotees, we must pray to Krishna, we must pray to the spiritual master, we must pray to the deities, we must pray to the holy name, we must pray to the acharyas, that we become purified and we no more find joy in these things. It is a stage of purification. It is not just intellectualization. Intellectually, somebody may know a lot of things, but may still be seeking. What are we seeking? What is driving? That is an indication of our spiritual purification. So, antavat phalam. But that intellectual conviction also has its place. Because once we have to be intellectually convinced, so that we can pursue this with earnestness, with seriousness. When Maya comes and disturbs us, we have to remind ourselves. So, one should therefore not desire any sort of material enjoyment, being sensible enough to worship the Supreme Personality of God. And then Prabhupada is saying the leaders of nonsensical persons are still more nonsensical because they preach openly and foolishly that one can worship any form of the demigods and get the same result. This sort of preaching is not only against the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita or those of Srimad Bhagavatam, but it is also foolish. Because during the 70s and 80s, there was a very strong, even now it is there, but I think it is diminished to some extent. Some of the new ideas have emerged in modern India's common thinking of people. In the 70s and 80s, this idea was very strong. Tatoma, tatoma. Whatever your opinion, whatever your wishes, that path you can follow. All of them will lead to the same thing. And so Prabhupada is saying that it is so foolish. If you buy a ticket to Bombay, it will not take you to Baroda. You go to the train station, buy a ticket to Bombay. Whether you jump into any train, it doesn't matter, it will take me to Bombay. So it's so absurd. And Krishna also explains this. Antavattu phalam tesham tatmavat alpamedasa. Devan devayajo yanti. Devayajaha devan yanti. Those who worship the devatas, yanti madhyojano. And those who worship me, they come to me. Madhyajana, mam yanti. So all of these very clear directions are there in the Vedic literatures. Somehow there are people in this world, in our country especially, who mislead. And then Shukadeva Goswami makes the distinction that all of these kind of different devatas are there and they may reward all these things. But there is another, because he's talking to Parikshit Maharaj, who is about to die, and he has asked him, what is the highest thing? So, Parikshit Goswami is saying that all of this may be there, but there is something else. Akamaha Purusham Param. There is also a state of becoming desireless, which is the highest. And such people who want to become free from all desires, they have to worship the Supreme Lord, Krishna. If we have to worship, because all the devatas are part of the material world, and worshipping them will not take us out of the material world. Unless we go out of the material world, that is the state of liberation, we cannot be freed from these desires. So to become akamaha, one has to become free from the influence of the modes of material nature. Because all types of karma is under the influence of the modes of material nature. So this should be a great motivation for us. And we see that in the Bhagavad Gita too. When Krishna was describing all these different modes of material nature and how there is a food, those who are under Sattva Guna, what kind of food they eat, or those who are under Rajo Guna, what happens, what is their conviction, what kind of worship, what kind of life, all of that Krishna is describing. And then Krishna makes one statement. See, Sattvat sanjayate jnanam rajaso lobha eva cha pramado moha tamaso bhavato ajnanam eva cha. Further, the modes of goodness, from the mode of goodness, real knowledge develops. Sattvat sanjayate jnanam rajaso lobha eva cha. From the mode of passion, greed develops. Lobha. Pramado moha tamaso bhavato ajnanam eva cha. From the mode of ignorance, foolishness, madness and illusion develop. Urdhvam gachanti sattvastha madhye tishtanti rajasa jaganya gunabuddhistha adho gachanti. Those situated in the mode of goodness gradually go upward to the higher planets. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets. And those in the mode of ignorance go down the hellish planets. Nanyam gunebhya kartaram yada drishtam pashyati gunebhyascha param veti madbhavam sori gacchati. When you see that there is nothing beyond these modes of nature in all activities, so all the activities in the material world that are happening, it's actually an interplay of the modes of material nature. When you see Nanyam gunebhya kartaram yadha drishtam pashyati, when you see that there is nothing beyond these modes of nature in all activities, gunebhyascha param veti madbhavam. And one who understands that the Supreme Lord is transcendental to all these modes. Gunebhyascha param vetti. Madbhavam. My nature, my Krishna's nature is Gunebhyascha param vetti. Madbhavam. So adhigacchati. And then you can know my spiritual nature. After saying this, Krishna says, Gunanetan atityatrin dehi deha samudbhavan janma mrityu charaju dukkhayo vimukto amritam vashnati. When the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes, Gunanetan atityatrin dehi deha samudbhavan, he can become free from birth, death, old age and their distresses and can enjoy nectar even in this life. Janma mrityu jara dukkha vimukto amrita vashnati. Moment Krishna says this, Arjuna becomes interested. So Krishna, you are telling that there is something beyond the modes of material nature? Because Krishna himself is beyond. Gunebhyascha param vetti madbhavam sodhigacchati. Krishna has said that I am transcendental. And then he is saying, Dehi deha samudbhavan gunanetan atityatrin. Not only I am transcendental, even you can become transcendental. You are deha samudbhavan, dehi. You are actually a dehi, an occupant in the body. And this deha samudbhava has happened because of the three modes of material nature. And this gunanetan atityatrin dehi deha samudbhava. And if you do that, what is the benefit? Janma mrityu jara dukkha vimukta. You can be freed from the miseries. Janma is miserable. Mrityu is miserable. We all want to avoid that. If possible, we want to live on. If possible, we want to extend a little longer. You see, who wants to die quickly? You see. And jara, old age. Who wants to get old? We all want to remain a little younger if we can. All to do exercise. Yoga has become very popular. Why? If you can avoid, if you can postpone old age a little bit, by a few years more, it's desirable. You see, nobody wants these things. Janma mrityu jara dukkha vimukto amrita vashnati. So Krishna is giving here a plan. Moment Krishna says this, Arjuna asks, Kailinga strim guna etan atito bhavati prabho. Kimacharaha khatam chaitam stri gunan ativartate. What are the symptoms? What is the behavior of a person? What are the symptoms of a person who has transcended the modes? Kimacharaha. What is his behavior? What is his conduct? Katham chaitam strim gunan ativartate. How can one transcend? What are the symptoms? What is the behavior? What is the conduct? And how does one transcend? And Krishna explains in the next two verses what are the symptoms and what is the behavior. And then in the next following verse, Krishna answers the third question of Arjuna, Katham chaitam stri gunan ativartate. And the answer is, Mam chayo abhyavicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityayitam brahma bhuyaya kalpate. It is by bhakti yogena sevate. So, this is our hope, to become transcendental to the modes of material nature, so that we can enter devotional service, pure devotional service, which is pleasing to Krishna. And for us, the process is bhakti yogena sevate. That is why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu articulates this one nicely. There is sadhana bhakti, and that will lead to Radharana bhakti. Sadhana bhakti is also bhakti, but under regulations. And when we do that, we become gunanetana tithyatrim. Then Radharana bhakti. And then that intensifies to become prema bhakti. So all through it is only bhakti, you don't have to depend on anything else. Even other methods, karma, jnana, all of them bring some result because it has a touch of bhakti in it. So bhakti is the most important. This is the argument that Srimad Bhagavatam is developing. Krishna is presenting this, and so nicely this is articulated by Chaitanya. So next verse is an important verse. Shukadeva Goswami has just begun by saying Akama Purusham Param. Then he tells more. In the next verse, another important verse that will come. We will see that in the next verse. Anyone has any questions? To see. Yes.
Like we understand this, Hare Krishna. We understand that moon is a deity of mind. Moon is a deity of mind. Moon controls the mind. So here it is in translation. It is said that if we want sense gratification, we have to worship the moon. So it is talking about the mental level sense gratification or physical level gratification also.
Or mental level or physical level. Travel all kinds of sense gratification. Kamo yate soma. Moon will give you pleasure of the mind, pleasure of the body, pleasure of senses. It just is calm. All kinds of one who desires sense gratification. When senses are gratified, you enjoy. The mind also is very happy. Sense, mind, they are all interconnected. So it gives happiness, both levels. Bodily level, sense level, mental level. Soma can do. Yes.
Addiction.
Yes.
So every practitioner of Krishna consciousness is seriously practicing, he or she desires to transcend these modes.
Yeah.
But like whatever experience I have in my life, we see there are times, there are those periods out there in which the consciousness is very high and everything looks very pleasant. But sometimes like it happens suddenly, like maybe yesterday everything is alright and today itself I may come under the modes of nature. So this kind of oscillation they happen. So like from your rich experience, you can just give some tips so that we can, these oscillations they come down at the earliest, even if accidentally we come under the modes of nature. So instead of being for a longer time, quickly we can come out some.
So this kind of oscillations happen, and so in Rupa Goswami's description, Adhav Shraddha Tata Sadhu Sangha Atha Bhajana Kriya Tata Anartha Nivrittisya Tattva Nishtha. If one becomes Nishtha, Nishtha is a stage where that wavering is not happening. So we have to pray to Krishna, pray to the spiritual master to bring us to that level. And we must also remember the instructions, even Prabhupada gives these instructions, that this path of spiritual realization is like the sharp razor's edge. Meaning, if you are a little inattentive with a sharp razor's edge, it can cut and it will bleed. When you have a sharp razor, you have to be very careful. Kshurasya dhara nishitha durgam padasta kavayo vadanti. This is what durgam padasta kavayo vadanti. This path is like that. The modes of material nature can come over. So constantly we have to be careful. There's another instruction by Srila Prabhupada. So in other words, we have to be alert. We can't be negligent at any time. Another place Prabhupada explains. This is in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Brahma is praying because Lord Brahma has been entrusted with this enormous powers to create this world with all kinds of variegatedness and all of this. So Brahma is concerned that if I'm doing all of this, I can forget you. Very wonderful prayers of Lord Brahma, very wonderful desire, concern of Brahma. I'm involved in all of this creation. What if I get carried away? Because even small things we do, we get carried away, right? You make nice halwa, we feel, very good. You collect 1 crore check, and, I collected 1 crore. We preach to somebody and then, see how nicely I preached. We get carried away like this. Even with small success, Brahma is going to have such a universal success, creating the universe. So he's concerned. So in the purport of one of those verses where Brahma is expressing this concern to the Lord, Prabhupada mentions that unless one is protected by the Lord, one cannot remain on the spiritual platform. Hence, one has to constantly pray for the Lord's protection. So, to come out of the modes of material nature and to remain unaffected by the desires, material desires, it requires special protection. The living entity by his own struggle and endeavor cannot do it. Daivihesha gunamayi mama maya duratya. And so it requires special protection. And hence, one has to constantly pray for Lord's protection. So, somebody is nishtha because he has learned this art and constantly be praying. Without Lord's protection, special protection, one cannot remain on the spiritual platform. This is advancement, not intellectual platform, spiritual platform. And that happens by constant prayer to the Lord. So these are all the different instructions that Prabhupada has given. We have to be always vigilant, always careful, like you are dealing with a sharp razor's edge. We have to be constantly praying. And we have to become nishtha. And our chanting is Chetodharpanamarjanam. Dharpanamarjanam is anartha nivritti. So, in other words, our sadhana, everything that we do, it is not a mechanical exercise. It's not so mechanically we have to keep doing. So we have to be consciously involved in our sadhana, where we are consciously praying to the Lord. Yesterday we were singing, I don't know if you were there in Gurugram, was that Bhakti Vinod Thakur's song?
My mind has been part of my mind.
Why does my mind weep when I chant the holy name? When will I weep when I chant the holy name? Very beautiful elaboration of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's words, Shikshashtakam. Nayanam galadashudharaya vadanam gargadadayati pulakai nichitam vapuhu kada tava namakrahane bhavishyati. So, these are all very great instructions, great acharyas who have elaborated this wonderful consciousness that is expected. We are expected to develop. So, by remembering, to be able to do all of this, we have to be constantly in good association. Good association of devotees who are charged with that, who want to do this, who want to be free from material desires. Because material desires comes in the mind, in our consciousness, and the mind plays all kinds of tricks. We will manipulate things in the world, we become manipulative. Because we are an institution, in our institutional manipulation we become involved in. So all very unfortunate. Prabhupada didn't want such things to happen. He said, this institution there should be no politics. Everyone trying to help others, to advance in spirituality. So, if we are careful about all these instructions and constantly praying to Krishna, Prabhupada, then we can quickly come over this oscillating state and become Krishna. We'll stop here. Rantaraj Srila Bhagavatam ki, Shri Shri Radha Vrindavan Chakra ki, Shri Nitai Gauranga ki, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki, Srila Prabhupada